Good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Angela Carr from the class of 2001, and I serve as president of the Greater Providence Alumni Club, also known as the Mal Brown Club. On behalf of the club, I want to wish you all a very Merry Christmas. And as we kick off Christmas week, the Greater Providence Alumni Club is proud to offer this exclusive discussion of the 2020 presentation of Trinity Rep's A Christmas Carol. Joining us this evening as our panel moderator is Ariel Tavares from the class of 2020. Ariel is a resident of Providence and was awarded her bachelor's degree in English and political science, as well as a minor in Black Studies. She graduated summa cum laude last May. Widely recognized as a student leader during her time at PC, she was a new student orientation counselor, member of our Derigo Leadership Society, and believer of words. She was an orientation leader and played intramural sports. She did all of this while serving as a member of the Friars Club, including being named its president during her senior year. She was obviously very busy and accomplished at Providence College. She is currently employed by Hasbro, where she serves as an assistant manager of brand publicity. Please welcome Ariel.
Stop, everyone, please. Thank you for such a nice introduction. So thank you so much for having me to be sort of like a moderator for this little great panel of brilliant individuals that I've had the pleasure and honor to be taught by during my undergraduate career. If my screen time was to increase in any way, I'm happy it's in the virtual presence of you three. So I have some fancy bios of my own to read, and I will first be introducing Mr. Joe Wilson. So Joe Wilson Jr. has been a member of the Trinity Repertory Company for 15 seasons. Many of us who have attended the wide array of performances by our nationally recognized theater are quite familiar with Joe, as he often has the leading role in many of Trinity's award-winning productions. Mr. Joe Wilson has a BA in political science from the University of Notre Dame and an MFA in acting from the University of Minnesota. Besides being a member of the resident acting community, he is on the board of many local not-for-profit organizations, including the Manton Avenue Project, for which he was recognized as their 2014 Volunteer of the Year for his contributions not only as an artist, but as a teacher. Mr. Wilson is a native of New Orleans, Louisiana, and is a proud member of the Actors Equity Association, and then insert here a very fancy acronym, SAG and AFTRA. Welcome, Joe Wilson.
Thank you so much. It's good to be here.
Next, I'm introducing the infamous Dana Dillon. So I have been taught by Dana. So Professor Dana Dillon serves as an associate professor at PC in the departments of theology and public and community service studies. Dr. Dillon has been widely published and has taught courses ranging from major documents of Vatican and moral problems today to race, gender, and Christian discipleship. She's also a longtime friend of Joe Wilson. After having some rowdy times, I hear, at Notre Dame, maybe we'll get a couple stories or two. Together, they have brought the theater to the classroom for in-depth discussions with our students, demonstrating how the classical parallels the issues of today. Welcome, Dr. Dillon.
Thanks. I'm really happy to be here.
Yes. Last and certainly not least, I have Elizabeth Bridgham. Professor Elizabeth Bridgham is an associate professor of English at PC. Dr. Bridgham is a widely published expert on the works of Charles Dickens and 19th century British literature and culture. Featured on a PC broadcast where she spoke to the enduring appeal of A Christmas Carol, Dr. Bridgham joins us this evening to share her thoughts how this timeless classic has transcended through generations.
Thank you so much for having me. It's really fun.
And just some housekeeping stuff. So this evening, we ask our guests to submit questions during the program. Please use the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen for your submissions. We will try to get as many as possible questions as we can as the time permits. And this program will also be recorded for archival purposes and will be shared on our PC media channels. So let the fun begin. Let me switch my screens. So Joe, can you talk a little bit why it is so important for Trinity Rep, and to you yourself, obviously, to find a way to make a Christmas Carol happen, even given the fact that a live show was quite impossible?
Wow. First of all, Ariel, it's so great to see you, and I am so proud of you. I have to say that. Your accomplishments and most of all your joy is infectious, and we're better to have you. So thank you. And all of my friends and colleagues here. That's a big question, and I'm kind of I'm delaying because it's a complicated question, actually. It's an enduring story. It was a story, and I'm sure that Elizabeth can speak more to correcting my history on the play, but it was written by an artist who needed to make some money. And Trinity Rep has done Christmas Carol, as many institutions across the country have used that holiday production as a means of not only bringing the community together, but and just being brutally honest with you, as a means, it is a story that people every year, we don't have to market, we don't have to explain what this is about, we don't have to generate interest in this story. The story continues to appeal to people because it is the ultimate story of redemption. It's the ultimate story of a quote villain making good. The story is about, and also the story reminds us constantly of our responsibilities that we have to our fellow human beings. But it's also really an incredible ghost story, is what it is. It's a really cool, fun ghost story. And that's something that I think is enduring for people as well. A Christmas Carol is a unifier. And that's the one way I can explain the story. We all know a Scrooge. We've all been a Scrooge. We all know a Bob Cratchit. We all have been Bob Cratchit. Hello. We all know the family that he has, and the vulnerability of our children. We all know about, unresolved conflicts in family, and conflicts that we hold on to so long sometimes that we forget what they're about. That's the complicated nature of family. But there's also something about, we all know and appreciate magic. And the Christmas Carol is a magical ghost story. And I think that what's also interesting about this play, and I know I'm speaking to folk who don't need to be reminded of the reason for the season, but there is a vein in this play that really asks fundamental questions about what do we believe in, and how do we believe, and I believe, what is God, and how is God manifest, and I think that God is manifest in all three of those spirits, including future, the scariest of them all. And so I think the piece does very much tap into that which is spiritual within us. And I think that we all grapple with that spirituality throughout our lives. Some of us come to different relationships with that than others. But I think the story is a testament to, I think, a grappling with a connection to something that is more spiritual. And we find that Scrooge goes in that journey over the course of a play. And I think it's so great that the final spirit doesn't even talk to him. It nods, it points, it beckons, it calls. And Scrooge, and that's the one stave that I talk really the most, going to the final stave, because I'm having to work that out. And yes, we have relationships to the divine for inspiration and for guidance. And I'm not going to get into that because Dana has got that covered. But
we can talk some theology if you want.
You can spit the theology at me, but I'm not going to go into a lane that I shouldn't be in. But I do understand the lane of constantly asking questions around what matters to me, what's important, what are my values, what is spirituality, what am I connected to, whether that be the ancestors, God, Yahweh, whomever that may be. And so that's why Christmas Carol is an enduring story, in my opinion.
And I love how you brought up those themes, because I feel like, especially now, everyone's grappling and even has the time. That's what it is, has the time to grapple with those questions of humanity, spirituality, and like connectedness. Since we are talking about the history and why we think has endured for so long, it was published in, if I'm correct, Dr. Bridgham, please let me know, 1843. Why do you believe in your respective discipline? Why has it endured for so long?
Well, I think Joe's given us an excellent answer to that question. You know, all of those themes about what it is to be human and how we connect to the other people who are in our communities and in our lives, all of these things, they don't change that much over the years. And so, you know, the kind of core themes of the story really do endure. And I'm so glad that, Joe, you brought up the ghost story aspect of it too, because it's got a rollicking plot and it brings together, you know, things to be afraid of and things to laugh at and things that are just going to, you know, jerk the tears right out of your eyes with Tiny Tim. But I think too, to kind of go along with that, one of the things that I loved about this year's production of A Christmas Carol, and I think this is true for Trinity through the years, but it especially hit home for me this year, was the contemporary relevance of the production and the fact that, you know, we have the characters communicating with each other on screens just as we're doing now. We have Scrooge wearing a mask. We have you know, him walking outside through this kind of eerie, empty city of Providence and, you know, encountering signs that say vote and signs that say COVID testing. It couldn't be more of the moment that we're in right now. And yet I think that this is also really in the spirit of Dickens's original story. You know, these days, because the book came out in 1843, when we talk about A Christmas Carol, we tend to use words like classic and timeless. But when Dickens was writing, he wasn't thinking of this story as classic or timeless. He was really referencing things that were happening in his own political reality and to the communities around him. So, you know, we find references in A Christmas Carol to the Poor Law of 1834, which really made it difficult for people who were indigent and who were really suffering to get any kind of government assistance outside of really dehumanizing places like workhouses. And we see references to infant and child mortality, which was rampant in the 19th century, the gap between the rich and the poor, which hasn't really gone away today in our contemporary environment, a failure to educate the children of the poor, child labor, which Charles Dickens himself experienced. He worked in a warehouse when he was a small boy, so he knew that kind of suffering intimately. And of course, debtors' prisons are referenced in the story too. So all of these kinds of contemporary social ills and social issues were ones that Dickens was weighing in on. And while I think he has a reputation for being sweet and sentimental, especially in the Carol, there are really aspects of this story that are quite gritty and that are quite dark. And this production that we see this year really honors both aspects of the story. We have the sweetness, we have the sentiment, but also we have that dark side that I think we can all relate to and see happening in the world around us today.
110%. Dan, I'm not sure if you want to jump into regarding.
I would love to. I mean, maybe just pull a couple of things together that I heard from both of you that I think are so important. So one thing, I think that when we look at timeless texts, the truly timeless texts are so timeless also because they are of the moment when they were written. They get at a truth that is real for that moment that then ends up speaking to something that transcends that particular moment. And I think you both have articulated so much of this. I will say that one of the things, so part of my expertise is in virtue ethics, right? And theological virtue ethics. And one of the things that I see very much in Christmas Carol all the time, but then also, again, particularly this production, is the ways in which, I mean, Jacob Marley ends up saying that he has formed the chain, right? Through the ways that he has ignored his fellow human beings, right? Humankind is my business. Forbearance, charity is my business. Jacob Marley says, or should have been my business, right? But instead he was forging these chains. Well, I was really struck through this production by the isolation that you see Scrooge in. Right, and I mean, maybe that's because I've had my own experience of sort of pandemic isolation and all of my conversations mediated through screens, all of my human interactions. But also you see the ways in which it's not just the pandemic, but choice after choice that he makes to push people away that leads to that isolation. But I think it was expressed so much more powerfully by, Joe/Scrooge walking across I-95 from Federal Hill to Trinity Rep. You just really saw the power of the choices that I have made in my past push my community away and leave me on my own. And I think the power of, and I did feel like this year's production, the kinds of connections that Scrooge remakes at the end, we kind of went quickly through that and didn't, and part of it was, I think, you can't end up with everybody on stage singing together in the same way in today's limitations. But really what Scrooge does is in relationship after relationship, he makes a gift, he does the good thing. And in that way, what he's doing is he's concretely loving his neighbor. In a way, to be theological for a moment here, I mean, this is exactly the feast of Christmas is the feast of the Nativity. It's the feast where Christians celebrate God who transcends all time, entering into our history, entering into our flesh, entering into relationship with all of us in this very concrete way. And of course, what Christians are called to do is to continue to live out that call by loving one another in concrete ways. Scrooge fails to do that in the beginning, but that's what he begins to enact in the end. And the line, what Scrooge was better than his word, right? That he kept all of his promises that he made at the moment of this conversion and then some. And I do think, I mean, especially for Christians, right? There's this call that we owe this deep, if we're serious about love of God, we owe this deep and concrete love to our neighbors. And I do think that that's something, Christian or not, people of various spiritual traditions, or even just a humanist sort of tradition, can really embrace that as well. It's not just sort of love in theory, but love in practice that we're really called to.
And if I could just jump in on that last point, Dana, I think that's such a good point. And the Christian side of things is there, and the humanist side of things is there in Dickens, that he's really writing, a kind of secular tale for Christmas that can apply to all audiences, no matter where they are spiritually or religiously. But one thing that I just want to mention too about the ending of the story that we don't see in the play this time around, although I know it's sometimes incorporated, is that, there's a lot of emphasis on Scrooge's charity. He gives to the charitable gentlemen or gentlewomen that we see in this production. He gives the turkey to the Cratchit family. But for me, one of the things that always really moves me about what Scrooge does at the end of the story is that he calls Bob Cratchit into his office and he says, "I'm going to raise your salary." And he's combining those charitable acts with an act of justice. It's never been okay that he's only paid Bob Cratchit 15 shillings a week. And so he's remedying that ill, not as an act of charity, but as an act of true justice. And Dickens is suggesting we need both, right? That we need to be charitable to our neighbors, to our community, but we also need to be just within that.
And Joe, how did you tap into that too? Especially, we talk about like helping out our neighbor, but our neighbors, we can't be in close proximity to them anymore. And I think this production really tapped into the isolation that Dana was talking about. Obviously, I've said it before, the ghosts have great connection. I wonder what provider they have, because I do not have that over here. But how did you tap into that? And you played Scrooge for 2 years in a row now. Like how did your role change?
Well, I don't know if this is a time to give you a little bit of background about how this all went down. But as the season unfolded and things were being canceled, and as we saw this was going to go deep into the season, I think there was a commitment to try and preserve A Christmas Carol, to do something, to be engaged with the community. We thought it was important to do this story now. But it was a challenge. Literally, we started off by sitting on a table and we workshopped the script, because the way that we approach our work, Trinity Rep is a classically oriented regional theater company. But it's important to know whether it's Dickens or whether it's Ibsen or whether it's Shaw or Shakespeare, or Wilson or Hansberry or whomever, we're always asking, and we do our share of new plays, don't get me wrong, but we're always asking the fundamental question of why are we doing this now?
Mhm.
Why is it important now? And that's with a King Lear or with A Raising the Sun or with a new play. Why are we doing this now? Because, whether we achieve this in practice and we're working toward it, and we can get deeper into that if y'all would like to, we strive to be able to create work that's of, by, and for our community. We have fallen short of those practices specifically because of the things that Dickens is talking about in this story. He's not just challenging this man, he's challenging institutions and systems. And so, that's why I also prefaced, what I said in the beginning is that it's not just about us trying to teach y'all something, but we as an institution, I hope that we can continue to learn as well. And so, again, we ask that question, why are we doing this now? And, for all of us who are artists, who are in different situations in terms of where we were with our work, our capacity to pay the rent, to pay the electric bill. I'm fortunate to be an assistant professor at Wheaton College, and I also am an adjunct faculty member at Emerson College. But this continues to be an existential threat to the ability of artists to make art in our communities. But I need to be clear about that. Not so much to make art, because artists have made art for thousands of years, but to make art in the capacities that we have set up to make that art within. So we asked a lot of big questions about doing it. We did ask a question about why are we doing this now? We did ask a question about even why is this appropriate now? Because we also were aware as artists what these shows mean for institutions. They mean a lot for our theater. Our theater raises $1.2 to $1.5 million on this show every single year. Now we're doing it for free
Mhm.
and for donations, but it's a very important part of our season. So I don't want to get it twisted. It's not just financial, but for us in terms of the psychology of, I think, for the theater, and I think the psychology of the community, we felt like we needed to do this. And then became the challenge of how. So we workshopped this thing for a week. We talked about ideas. We threw stuff around the table. What's the frame for this thing? And it was important, that I'm going to stop talking because I can talk about this all night. One of the questions we asked, that we were asked early on by the theater to submit to the community was, people asked, how are we doing? Because we are figures in the community. People are concerned with how are the artists doing. And, after thinking about that question, even before working on Carol, I had a complicated relationship to that question because, yes, I'm not doing theater, but are you asking how I'm doing in terms of COVID? Are you asking how I'm doing in terms of racism? Are you asking how I'm doing? How are you asking how I'm doing? And so I know for me, even playing Scrooge became a little complicated because I didn't want to at any point make this a trivial exercise in just doing a show, but also acknowledging where I was as a Black gay man in this world, and what I was sort of racking my brain around, trying to wrap my brain around, was not just being safe in COVID, but watching this institution wreak havoc on our democracy, watching this disease wreak havoc on my theater, but also watching how it had unlocked all of the things that story asks us to unlock: the injustices, the levels of whether it be food insecurity or police violence. I mean, COVID unlocked everything, and it also unlocked some stuff that we needed to work on, that we are continuing to work on at Trinity Rep. So we were all in a complicated space with doing this production, and so we wanted to honor that. And I think first and foremost was to set up a production where we made no illusions. And we've always done this at Trinity, that, we were taught early on, it's an old acting technique about building a fourth wall and pretending like y'all aren't there. We've never done that at Trinity. It's all about having a relationship to the audience and acknowledging that they're there. I don't think it's good acting practice, but we can talk about that in the class you'll take from me. But, so we're always aware of the relationship that we have to the audience. And so, and they always know that it's us. These are your actors stepping into these roles. So that was kind of frame number one, that we would not hide that, it's Joe playing Scrooge, or, Rachel or Becky or Stephen. No. And that's why the thing starts off in my house. It starts off there, and we flipped it. So my home as Scrooge becomes the theater, but my home literally or the play begins to unfold. How do I put this? My office is my home, which was the truth, because my office was my home. But also then my Scrooge's home becomes the theater. And so that was actually shots from my own house at the top of that thing. You know, that was my chime outside my door with my dear late dog Stella, and that was my bird feeder. And she actually died during the shooting of Christmas Carol. So the fact that they added that shot was very meaningful to me. But we wanted to make it about us responding to this play, responding to this pandemic, responding to racism, responding to where we are. So I think doing ultimately what we've been asking of that play every single season is to remind ourselves, why are we doing this now? And reminding ourselves that we have to recommit, double down on what our values are. And those values are not just rooted in hope for change, but also rooted in practice and action and activism and doing something, a call to action. And so that was our big thinking about the play. And then I can talk about, they dropped us off technology boxes. They dropped us off microphones. They dropped us off ring lights. They dropped us off. We shot that thing on phones that were not our phones. They were programmed by our designers. And then we moved into the theater. I was the only one there, and we shot that on a regular movie type camera. And so we also wanted to have those different. We wanted the crudeness of Zoom, because y'all Zoom is crude. We're sick of it. It's crude.
Your Scrooge came out right there.
Yeah, it was.
I heard him. I heard him.
And so we wanted to lean into the technology and allow them to be what they were, but to weave what the technology was into trying to find a way where using the movie camera in the full space of our open set in the theater, that seemed more appropriate. Using Zoom, because I was literally in my house, costuming myself as my dog slept, setting up my lighting, putting on makeup. They sent us the costumes. I mean, we're doing it all. And we wanted it to feel that way, actually. And then so all the other ideas of the storybook, they just became ways that we could tell the story without having the capacity for getting people together. We couldn't have a Fezziwigs party. We couldn't have, we call them crossovers in Dickens, where you're transitioning from Scrooge's office to his house. We couldn't have the massive crossovers of people, the townspeople. We couldn't have it. But we also knew that this is where we are. We can't have it.
And to make it accessible to people too. The fact that it was free, I think that is an act of what we were saying, charity, justice, like to make things accessible, because we've seen how things have not been accessible to people, especially in this time. I like how you're talking about the timeliness of it after we just talked about how timelessness it was in a way. So this year, I think even the directorial decisions were great. This year, we saw the largest civil rights movement happen across the country. As a queer Black woman myself, like to see relationships that I've had and on screen and even with people who share the same shade as me, I know that Trinity is committed to like color conscious casting. Can you tell us more what that is and how it's impacted this production and how meaningful you think it is?
Well, let's just be clear, Ariel. I'm so happy you're going there, and I like it. You're going there. We haven't always been. The regional theater was born basically out of being a response to not wanting to be the commercial theaters on the coasts. But we really actually remade ourselves in the model of them. And I think that we did that for a variety of reasons. I think the biggest reason was as we were chasing technology of what Broadway could afford or what movies could afford, that we in turn built bigger spaces. We had more lights, we had more crap, that we tried to emulate a thing that we were never meant to be. And so I think, but we can get, I'm not going to get too deep into that. So we made ourselves basically in the images of these things, I think in the end. And so, but they were meant to be places that we would provide more opportunities for Black people, brown people, provide more opportunities for women, provide more opportunities for different kinds of playwrights. And that did happen to a certain extent. But we also had something called colorblind casting. And it was kind of, reminds me of, it's been, I think it was the 10th anniversary of Don't Ask, Don't Tell 2 days ago. And so I think Don't Ask, Don't Tell was kind of a version of colorblind casting. Well, we'll just pretend like we don't see that you're Black, or we'll pretend like we don't see that you're Latin. And that is absolutely destructive and absolutely counterproductive. It's wrong. Every time I step foot on the stage, I'm trying to understand the context of, I know that you see a Black person in front of you, or you may see somebody that you can't quite place, because I am from New Orleans. And so, I passed the brown paper bag test, if y'all know what that is. And if you don't, look it up. So my privilege and my skin has afforded me a certain amount of privilege of being a lighter skinned African-American man. But, when you start talking about color on stage, you can't ignore color, because but it also is destructive, because for me as an actor, I can't ever ignore color. Every character I play comes from perspective of, how does my Blackness, my Black body in this space fit into the context of this play? And sometimes we get it right and sometimes we don't get it right. But we have to be intentional about it. There's no such thing as colorblind casting. Color conscious casting is something that we have been working toward more over the past few years. And that is being intentional about how we put Black, brown bodies in spaces.
Mhm.
And knowing that that in fact tells a story. Your audience may say, well, I never saw color when I see Joe play that part. Well, you may not see color, but that Black kid who comes in the Project Discovery show sees color. And I see color when I'm trying to figure out, for example, I did, Chekhov's Cherry Orchard a few years ago with Kurt Columbus, and I played Lepakin. That made complete sense. The child of his parents used to work on the cherry orchard, and at the end of the play, I reveal I buy the orchard. It was great. That was a great example of purposeful color conscious casting. And I was the only Black person apart from Barbara Meek, who was a brown-skinned Fears as the maid in that production. There were times when we got it wrong, right? We did a production of Oklahoma. Well, we got it wrong. You had a white curly singing to a Black Judd Fry to hang himself in the smokehouse, which is a very powerful image. But then you have to think, but there were other Black people in our play. So it was like we were almost ignoring that as a thing or as a trigger for people. And it made people mad. But if we were intentional and I was the only person of color in that story as we created it, people would have understood that was the story that we were trying to tell intentionally. So, Ari, you bring up a big point. Color conscious casting is extremely important, both for the audience, but also for the artist, and also ultimately for the play and for the story that you're trying to tell.
For sure. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. That was great. So I'm seeing seems like our first. Ooh, okay. So we have a question from the audience. Okay, I'll cycle through that while first I ask you all another question, and then I'll break that question up a little bit. So you've all taught classes at PC. What do you think this current production can teach PC students and the alumni, especially during this time? We can start with with Dr. Bridgem or Dr. Dana if you'd like. Dr. Dana, that's different, but we're gonna try it.
Makes me feel like I should have a radio show, right? Call in and ask. So maybe that's it. So I guess since now I'm talking, I'll just go with that. So I think Christmas Carol always is an important lesson in the possibility. It doesn't matter how you were acting yesterday, or how you're going to act tomorrow. Here's a moment where you can choose a new path for yourself. I mean, I think Joe said before, it's a story of redemption. It's also a story of conversion, right? I can take this moment and begin to act in a new way. And I think that I mean, we were talking before, I think that's a lot of what gives it so much appeal, because Scrooge, each of us can see our own Scrooginess, whatever our issue is, and see in that moment that possibility of a new future, and you begin to enact it today. And I mean, I think that's what I would say as one major lesson for our students. I mean, I think people get kind of trapped into, well, here's what people expect me to be now. And there's always a possibility like that matters only so much. I mean, there's a great line at the end that says something along the line, maybe Joe can help me if he knows the dialogue here, but nobody ever did anything good that didn't have a little bit of a blowback. I'm not getting the line right, but made some of the people laugh and say, oh, it's not real, or it's not serious. But don't let that stop you from enacting the good that you know you're called to.
That was lovely. We were supposed to say feed line, right? Don't they feed you a line when you need help or something?
Yeah, I should have said line.
Line.
I think that's Dana. I think that's such a great message and such a great lesson for us all to learn. That what we've done before doesn't determine what we will do in the future or what we will do now. And I guess the only thing that I would have to add to that is the method by which we can learn that lesson is the same as the method that is applied to Scrooge in the story. That we think of the past, present, and future as being ghosts, but it's also the way that Scrooge has to learn to live. He says at the end of the story, I will live in the past, the present, and the future, and I will keep Christmas all the year round in my heart. And I like to think of that really as applying to us by focusing on the way that we really need to focus on our memories, on our communities, and on our hope, right? As ways of kind of making that conversion stick, of actually changing our lives and reaching out to other people. And I think, again, coming back to this production and how timely it is and how we need it in the moment of COVID-19, I feel like we're all living either in the past or in the future right now, especially maybe at the holidays. We're thinking about traditions that we've practiced in the past, or what we're going to do when all of this is over and we all have the vaccine. And those are both totally valid and wonderful things to do, and I'm doing them too. And the hard part, I think, is for us to live in the present right now, and to actually confront our reality and to kind of make a kind of peace with it insofar as we can, and still reach out to our communities in the ways that we are able to do, in a safe way, in a responsible way, and in a way that's going to build our communities. So I think that that's what the story really encourages us to do, by reminding us that it's not just the past, it's not just the future. We need all three. We need the present moment too.
You all are making me weepy, actually. Just beautiful people talk about this, because I guess on a personal level, I guess I would just say that a message to students is teaching at 2 universities as I have. I've been at PC before, and myself, so many of us have been so angry. And I'm not talking about what side. There's so much anger. Some of us most of us are so angry. And the question always comes up, about these sides and how can the other side be able to see? We have that question being asked on both sides because people are so angry. And the fact that I always love playing Scrooge, because this man seems impossible. It seems like an impossible task, but the possible happens. And that's a lesson that I know I needed, because I've been so angry. I'm still so angry about where we are and what this has done to all of us. But the story for me was a reminder that within that anger, that not only can I find hope and remain positive, but to have hope in the power of my fellow human beings in a really, really profound way in this midst of this polarization that exists in this country, in this world right now. So it was a deeply, deeply, deeply personal Christmas Carol in that regard, because so many of us are so entrenched in where we are and asking to be seen on every level, but people not being able to see. And so the journey of Scrooge, I think, is even more our journey of where we all are now, in a really, really deeply, deeply personal way, as a community, as a collective, as a culture, as a world, in a way that I have never experienced a story in. This is actually my 16th season in the company. I have never experienced not only my personal living in the story, but our community's need for this story. There were all kinds of people out there who needed us to do this. And I think for those reasons as well, because we all, yes, need to feel hope, but we need to also remind ourselves there's a possibility for that minds can change, that we can still change minds and hearts, that still exists in this world. So.
And I love the hope aspect, because I think the person that embodies that the most would be Scrooge's nephew. Like, from socioeconomically, like, he's not doing well, his son's sick, like he has all of these things and these reasons to not be hopeful, and to also not think that the person who is kind of inflicting a lot of that pain can change. But still, he like gives a toast to it, and he doesn't let his family to even like badmouth Scrooge and all of that too, which I think is very interesting.
But he keeps trying. He's not just hopeful. He keeps trying. He says, I'm going to come back every year, knock on this door and make the same appeal. He keeps trying. It's action. Yeah. And so I just wanted to kind of talk about hope, yes, but we have to do something. And
but that's also a whole other invitation, right? We can be invited by Scrooge to have that new moment, but we can also be invited by Fred to keep knocking on the door of that person that we feel like we should have written off 5 years ago. Maybe we did write them off 5 years ago. What does it mean to, in this new moment, say, or in every new moment, say, I'm going to keep inviting. I'm going to keep reaching out with kindness and no negativity that I expect the negativity, but it comes and it will not stop my kindness. I will keep inviting. We need people who are willing to do that in our communities.
And talking about that, so the production in general, the question from the audience was, so this show happened in 60 minutes, which was very impressive. So we lose details such as Scrooge giving Bob Cratchit a raise, ordering the giant turkey, which is my favorite. And they're wondering whether, Joe, you can talk about the choices that went into ending the show this year, what was cut, what was kept, group narration, and all of that good stuff.
Well, basically, we made choices. We made some crash choices. The first crash choice is that we are all Zoomed and streamed out. So how could we create a production that would keep people interested after a year of being on a computer or in a virtual world? I think more importantly, then the other question was, how could we do this production and be COVID safe? And what scenes absolutely required, what scenes do we absolutely have to have? And I think that we tried to solve the issues of all the sort of reconciliations or that wonderful scene where Scrooge is running around giving away money and he finds the solicitors and he gives away a turkey. We have a turkey boy in the production. He's bringing a turkey to Bob Cratchit and he's throwing money. He's throwing money all over the place. I think the way that we try to make amends for that, to no pun intended, borrowing from a play, is the fact that we are the community, that the community of actors, having Providence as a character in this play, was really important to us. It wasn't just a cool drone shot that saw me walking to the theater, but to remind us of our relationships to an empty city, to remind us of our relationships. So we try to just weigh, like, what images could we capture on camera that would give us the same kind of feel of what this moment is intended to be. But we struggle with this every year, y'all, because I mean, look, first of all, the one thing we have not talked about, the language and the text in this piece are incredible. I mean, I think about the moment even in the narrative descriptions that we tend to lose in our production because we're trying to make it a more active piece in terms of people talking to a character and, a character talking back. But there's some narrative that we fight every year about, the narrative of when, we can do in the theater, the big Ghost of Christmas Present entrance when he's, in the cornucopia stuff and laughing and there's dancing and there's stuff, coming down from the ceilings and candy canes. But man, when you read what Dickens wrote, and that long section of text where he describes what Scrooge has just walked into, the light that comes behind the door, and he goes and opens the door, and that text goes on forever, and it's magical because it's the abundance in language that's a reflection of the abundance in that room, and it goes on so long, it's uncomfortable, but it's beautiful. And so we lose a component of that every year, but we try to recreate that on stage. But we just knew that first of all, we're also battling time. This thing was being edited up until the last hour that it was released at noon. So we knew that we just really had to make some tough choices. But every year we ask the same questions. Every year a new director comes in, and every year a new director wants to add in this narrative text or this narrative text or this or this or this. But ultimately we figure out ways that how can we do this through action? How can we do this through storytelling in terms of what's on stage? And then this year we did, how can we do that through the images that we're taking or editing that we're doing? That became a whole new character. We didn't have the character of you this time because the audience is always our last character. What we had now was a whole new virtual world of thinking about how this would be edited together. What's this shot going to look like coming out of this? So it was a different task for us and a task that was brand new. So we made some tough choices. I won't say that All of it was completely successful. And I'm going to say that as an artist who's never quite satisfied with my work. You're always looking to find ways to tell a clearer story, a story that impacts the audience in a more profound way. But every year we make those kinds of choices, and ultimately it comes down to what is the essential of what we need to tell the story, and to do it within. We've gone from a 90-minute production at Trinity Rep, and now our production at Trinity has gone to 2 hours because we've added an intermission. And even then, you still can't capture all that narrative magic. So we just had to make some really tough calls. But to try and recreate that group sequence at the end and doing with multiple Zoom cameras, we just didn't think that would have given us even that effect. The beauty of that moment in the theater, or the beauty of that moment in the story, is it would have been difficult for us to do with what I think we had at our disposal in terms of the technology, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Can I just pick up on something that you said, Joe, about Providence coming into it, and using the shots of Providence? When I spoke with Kurt Columbus and Tyler Dabrowski a couple years ago about the many different versions of A Christmas Carol that y'all do every year. And they told me that there were kind of 4 non-negotiables that you need in every production of A Christmas Carol in order to satisfy audiences. And I think this was a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but they said you have to have London, you have to have English accents, you have to have flying, and you have to have snow. And that really stuck with me. That was great. And take any one of those elements out and you get trouble.
Mhm.
And we had snow this year, but for me as an audience member, I loved that it wasn't London. I loved that there weren't any English accents, that it was such an intimate carol that really, was grounded so locally, and that it's also really the production that's going out to probably an international audience because it's been made so widely available, because it's free, because it's streaming. So it's really a way of giving something of our city, of our community, to the rest of the world. And I just thought, again, in this year, where we're all in our communities, and it was kind of a love letter to Providence and to the theater itself. Seeing Trinity empty was both sad and beautiful, and I was really loved seeing that included.
I have to also, I really appreciate that about the accents. We always have that's a big source of discussion at the beginning of our rehearsals, and of course the director's already come in and figured out what they would like with that. But it reminds me of we all pick up these books and we read them to each other. We read them to our kids the night before Christmas Carol. We read them in our own dialects, in our own voices. We read them. And so I think that's another thing that makes it special when we don't do accents, because it reminds us that we all have the capacity to then share these stories. We do that, and we do that. We do that in our children's bedrooms. We do that by the fire. We do that every year. Whether you're a Black man in Alabama or, a white guy in Wyoming, somebody's reading A Christmas Carol to their kids, and they're doing it in their homes, wearing their clothes, and doing so in their own voices and coming from their own hearts. And that's, to me, when I think of the image of Santa and all the kids waiting, and this figure goes to every home, it's like we're all waiting. The world is waiting together collectively for the same thing to happen, the same thing that we're hoping for. I'm talking as a kid, you believe in Santa Claus. But to me, that's the magic of that. That's the same way that we tell these same stories over and over again collectively at this time of year. We sing the same song, Silent Night, Rudolph, whatever the songs we sing, Green Sleeves. We share collectively in that art. And it doesn't have to be in a singular dialect or through a singular voice or out of a singular body or a singular skin or culture. And to me, that's the magic and beauty of the holidays, particularly this.
I can't resist making the theological point, right? As I hear you talking about how we're all waiting for, right? I mean, for Christians, right? We're finishing up the season of Advent and waiting for Christ among us, right? And I again, I'll say, like, Christians have a very specific set of stories around this, right? And the again, God incarnate in Christ. But I also think it does tap into something, a kind of broader spirituality of, we're all yearning for the divine. We're all yearning for connection. We're all yearning for all these things that I think get embodied in different stories. But as you just said so eloquently, Joe, it's not one culture, it's not one time, it's not one place. And I'm actually thinking about a time that you and Kurt Columbus came into my DWC classroom, and we were talking about, I can't remember which play it was at that point that we were talking about.
Was it Black Odyssey?
It was before Black Odyssey. It might have been, you know what? It was The Mountaintop.
It was The Mountaintop.
It was The Mountaintop. And what we were talking about, the parallels between the space that is the stage and the space that is the classroom, because exactly what we do is we tell these stories and engage these texts and engage this art again and again, but reproduce it in a way that's both true to its origins and moves this cultural moment forward for our students, for our audiences, for the next generations, whatever they are. And I think that's the power of our work together, our overlapping and our collective work, which is why I'm always so grateful to have you as a conversation partner.
As someone who's been in a class with you both, it's a great dynamic, and I really love how you bring this other lens of the spirituality of A Christmas Carol, because there's also like physical manifestations of this with the ghosts and how I think it's such a beautiful story because physical intervention sometimes, especially now, like people yearn for that, for an intervention of some sorts, but how beautiful this story is like the magic of it, and how, again, it leads to that conversion that you were talking about that you link in all the time.
Absolutely. I love that you're kind of blowing my mind right now, the idea of those physical conversions, that we have to be in the presence of that somehow and have really, we have to feel it. You got to kind of feel it. Mm-hmm. And Scrooge gets the ultimate opportunity. And that's what makes it so painful. The moment when he goes back and, he's watching the scene with, he and Belle, and is reminded of what he did. And he's sitting there watching it and watching him. And trying to and how it's wonderful in the story, how that he becomes activated. At first, he's like, okay, this is cuckoo, cuckoo. And then he catches himself actually trying to participate in the story. You see? And so the fact that you brought up the idea of that physical, that kind of, what is it? He needed to be in the presence of this power. He needed to be transformed and placed in this thing. And that's the idea of walking in somebody's shoes, walking in the shoes, putting yourself in someone else's shoes. That's what I do for a living as an actor. But ultimately, I think that's the gift that Scrooge gets with this visitation. That's the gift of Jacob Marley. And he didn't know why he was thanking Jacob. You've always been a good friend to me, Jacob. Thank you. You don't know why you're thanking him yet, because you're about to go through hell. You know what I mean?
3 times.
What he is allowed is to feel. And it's not and ultimately, we talk about feeling. I'm not talking about feeling in terms of the mind or feeling in terms of the heart, but I'm talking about what it really does us physically. What is the physical sensation of that kind of transformation? There's a power to that. And we're always, as people, looking to put ourselves, I think, in moments when we can have a physical interaction with something. We may not know it, but I think as people inherently, mind and heart are one thing, but where the body exists in that, and even in terms of my actor training, it's like, I don't always feel like going to work every day, but if I set my performance up in such a way with my body provides me with emotional information, I can get through performance 8 times a week, more than if I'm trying to psych myself out to be sad or psych myself out. I'm using every aspect of my physical being to create a character. And if my mind is not working or my heart isn't into it, I'm using my body in ways that allow me to trigger those kinds of emotions and those kinds of memories. That's exactly what happens to Scrooge. He physically has to feel the smells of Christmas present, the pain of Belle, being in that place of darkness in future, and being terrified, absolutely terrified. And so I'm glad, thank you for bringing up that idea about the physical.
Of course. And we have one more question from the audience. It was how much control, this is from Deborah. Thank you so much for asking, Deborah. How much control do the actors have over what scenes, narration, etc. gets left in or taken out? Is that all based off the director?
That's an excellent question, and it depends on where you work. I am lucky enough to be a part of a resident acting company. I'm lucky enough to work with a collaborator named Kurt Columbus, our artistic director, who's been there for 15 seasons, who has been a partner with us in terms of the work that we do. And so, I have been in hierarchical structures. I mean, I've worked everywhere from on Broadway, off Broadway to regional theater. And you can imagine that, as a matter of fact, I did a show. I was on Broadway with Iceman Cometh with Denzel Washington, and I understudied him. And you can imagine that that was a very different experience in terms of people listening to Joe Wilson Jr. than when I am at Trinity Rep. And also what we have at Trinity Rep is an acting company that combined, we probably have 300 years of experience. And so Kurt was really, really great and gracious when he first came in to say that I'm here as a partner with you. He doubled down on having an acting company because for many regional theaters, acting companies are, the narrative that's given is that acting companies are expensive, but that's just not true. I think it becomes difficult to cast for resident companies when you're trying to compete with what is able to be done in terms of in environments where actors are more dispensable, i.e. New York and LA. It's not that acting companies are too expensive, it's that it takes a lot more work to commit to those companies and think about the well-being of those people for not just one show or one gig, but thinking about their livelihoods, thinking about them raising families, thinking about the quality of their lives. No one's thinking about my quality of life when I'm working on Broadway. Yes, I have a lot of license and agency at Trinity Rep, but ultimately the director has the final decision. The director makes the final decision, but we often make impassioned pleas. So it is a collaboration, but the director is the final arbiter.
And we should thank the director for creating this great production that we were able to experience this year. Before we wrap up and Joe gives us Tiny Tim's in famous words, of course, to wrap this up, does anyone have any final thoughts about this production or any words of wisdom they want to share with the audience?
Well, I mean, I'll dive in and just say I'm so grateful for this whole conversation. I mean, as we started talking about this possibility, part of the idea was exactly that we hoped that for some of our Friar family, maybe alums who've been gone for a while, they might recall with fondness Providence, including maybe an experience of going to Trinity Rep for Christmas Carol or something else. And then of course, the Mal Brown Club ended up sponsoring. So we have our Providence alums who are excited about this with us. But I think that this is exactly what I had hoped for in terms of bringing together great conversation partners to talk about this play, its meaning for us, and really the ways it invites us to be better members of community with one another. And so I guess I would just kind of leave it at that I hope for those who have been able to attend or those who will watch this in the coming weeks, that they'll really feel invited to give back and reconnect with community in new ways.
And I would just like to say, remind everybody that it's absolutely free. If you haven't seen it yet, it's absolutely free. We ask that you make a donation to the theater. We're raising money also for the Rhode Island Community Food Bank, but it's free. And so, if you haven't sent out Christmas cards and you live in Providence and you love Providence, send them the link to A Christmas Carol or encourage them to watch A Christmas Carol as your Christmas card to them. But we appreciate any support that you can give us in terms of continuing to spread the word.
Good idea.
Yeah, I want to say thank you to Joe and to Trinity Rep for this incredible Christmas gift to our community. I mean, I've sent the link to my mom, to my sister's family, to the in-laws. They've all watched it, they all love it, and I'm hoping that will continue. And if there's anyone here tonight attending that hasn't seen it yet, please go out and see it. This is a wonderful, wonderful production.
Yeah, do yourself
Absolutely.
a favor and watch it right now. Nothing else to do.
And God bless us all, everyone. From the bottom of my heart, thank you. Thank you all. Thank you for the time.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great night.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.